All right, everybody, I'm gonna actually start this video off with a fun little fact. It has been 6 years, and yes, we fielded a ton of requests for these laptops since we've looked at the LG Gram series. And today it's gonna be a little bit of an interesting video here because LG has launched 2 new models, the Pro 17 and the Pro 16. So what this video is all about is a comparison between these 2 devices. No, it is not a review. We've partnered with LG for this video to simply give you a buying guide. You're gonna see these models next to each other, both online and in store, and they look very, very similar. But within them, they're quite different. And believe it or not, in a lot of ways, I'm sure these are the laptops that plenty of MacBook Air buyers wish that Apple made. Because even though the Gram Pro series has plenty of screen real estate, they're almost unbelievably thin while still being ultra light, and as icing on the cake, they also offer a really good selection of I/O ports. So let's start with the basics. The Pro 17 is meant to offer a higher performance tier than other ultra portable laptops on the market. Meanwhile, the Pro 16 goes down the quintessential Ultrabook route, with more of a focus on things like battery life and a more compact footprint while still getting decent performance. Of course, the DNA of the Gram series stays the same like it always has. This is one of the thinnest and lightest laptop series on the market, bar none. Sure, the 17-inch version is a little bit thicker and slightly heavier than the 16-inch model, but when compared to other 17-inch laptops, it's still a lot more portable than you'd ever imagine. And yet portable and 17-inch, those 2 words only go so far together because look, this thing does have a bigger footprint when compared to other ultra portables around. I mean, it didn't even fit into my backpack, so make sure whatever you haul this thing around in has compatibility with 17-inch laptops, which my backpack doesn't. Of course, if you want something even more compact, LG has a whole lineup of 14-inch Gram laptops. But make no mistake about it, right? These are larger footprint laptops. They are pro models, so they're sort of emphasizing on that screen real estate. But LG, they haven't sacrificed in any way on the thinness. I mean, look at this thing. Not only that, it's the fact that despite the very, very low weight and how thin they are, you can still open them with, look, one hand, one finger actually. Not only that, but you can open it up and you can pound on this thing on the keyboard like it owes you money on either device. And the screen, it does not exhibit any wobble whatsoever. So LG, it seems like they've really nailed down their hinge game. Port selection is also identical on both versions, and honestly, it puts a lot of other thin and light laptops to shame. But you see guys, this is all it takes, right? It's to take a little bit of function and put it over form while also just addressing the overall design. So what LG did is they simply put a very, very small swept down area on the side of the laptops to incorporate those ports without sort of impacting the perceived slimness of this LG Gram Pro series. And I have to hand it to them because they've also translated this port selection to their 14-inch models too. So it's not just for these higher end Pro series, it permeates the entire lineup. And I think a lot of other laptop manufacturers can take a sheet from LG's book here. LG also used a composite magnesium alloy for both laptops, and that leads to an incredibly rigid body despite how thin they are. The only downside to this is magnesium does tend to feel a little bit plasticky, which might turn some people off. But look, don't discount these laptops because of that feel. The overall build quality is very, very high. They also have identical all black deck designs with an anti-fingerprint coating that worked pretty well in my 4 weeks with them. It wasn't perfect though, but then again, which matte black finish is? I haven't personally come across one yet. The 16-inch does stand out though, since it has a brushed metal look to its lid. The 17-inch on the other hand goes with a black magnesium that somehow still doesn't show as many fingerprints as I've seen from similar finishes. But the real differentiating factor here between these 2 is what's inside. The Pro 16 uses Intel's Lunar Lake Ultra 7 256V 258V or the top of the line Ultra 9 288V. The 256V is the only one with 16 gigs of onboard memory and a 1TB SSD, while the 258V and 288V versions automatically come with 32 gigs of memory and a 2TB dual SSD setup. The Pro 7, meanwhile, goes a very different route. It gets Intel's higher performance Arrow Lake architecture, and it's only available with an Ultra 7 255H, but it also gets 16 and 32 gig memory options with 1TB and 2TB storage layouts. So do those different processor architectures and options actually lead to a big performance difference between these two laptops? Well, the way they go about delivering that performance is quite different. So the 16-inch model allows its processor to run up to 30 watts. Meanwhile, the 17-inch model increases that by more than 20%. It runs its Arrow Lake CPU at 37 watts. And look, while single core benchmarks like Cinebench have these neck and neck, the same thing just can't be said about CPU intensive tasks, because here the 255H's larger number of processing threads allow to pull ahead in the Cinebench multi-core results, sometimes by a pretty significant amount. There are a lot of other real-world applications which react the same way too. I mean, the additional power and higher performance-oriented architecture are why you would opt for the 17-inch anyways. Though to be honest with you, going with the more compact model and its 288V will still give most people more than enough performance than they need. Even in everyday tasks like in document processing and spreadsheet calculations, the 17-inch has an advantage. It's a lot less of a gap than in heavily multi-threaded tasks though, since Intel's 288V tends to perform really well despite its lower power envelope. The interesting thing here is that if you're a creator who relies on render outputs that are GPU accelerated, the 16-inch can actually pull ahead by a small margin based on our Resolve and Premiere tests, though it still falls behind in transcoding in areas like Handbrake. As for gaming, well, let's put it this way. The LG Gram Pro series aren't gaming laptops, not in any way, shape, or form, but they can game. And because of the additional power given to the 17-inch system, it tends to get slightly higher frame rates overall, which makes sense since the integrated GPUs on both processors have essentially the same specs. But when fed with a bit more juice, the Arc 140V can reach higher clock speeds. Still though, for its smaller footprint and reduced weight, the 16-inch model keeps things a lot closer than I thought it would. And you'd think such a slim chassis along with 30 to 37 watts of power would lead to higher temperatures or becoming overly noisy, but that actually didn't happen with either laptop. Both models ran pretty cool under a full core workload, even in their highest performance modes, and they were pretty quiet too. Meanwhile, surface temperatures were pretty good too, and that points towards LG's always evolving dual cooling system doing a good overall job. There are a few hotspots here and there too, but they're strategically placed away from your palms and legs if it's sitting on your lap. So obviously, overall, from a performance perspective, the Pro 17 with its higher wattage processor will win out over the 16-inch. But there is one other thing we haven't touched upon yet, and that is battery life. So basically, LG did the best they could to minimize the 255H's impact by pairing it up with a huge battery, whereas the Gram Pro 16 gets one with a 77 watt-hour capacity. Both are among the biggest we've seen on a thin and light up to this point though. And in all of our battery life testing, it's obvious some top-end performance was sacrificed to make the Pro 16 absolutely dominate in battery life, despite the 17-inch putting on some pretty good numbers too. In most tests, the smaller model gets at least 2.5 hours of additional runtime and is actually one of the first Windows laptops to hit over 19 hours in our light load test. But all of that evens out in gaming since the Gram Pro 17 has a much larger capacity battery, which tends to level the playing field against the more efficient Lunar Lake processor in the 16-inch model. And while there's some difference in the battery life department, both models have basically identical screen specs with 1610 1600p IPS panels with a 31 to 144 Hz variable refresh rate. Though if you want a constant refresh rate, you can easily set that in Windows. But there are some other things I wanted to call out here. The first point is a big one for me personally. If anybody who is watching this video now has seen any of my other long-term laptop review videos, you know I despise one thing on laptops, and that's glossy screens. It's simply because I spend a lot of time in well-lit environments, airports, coffee shops, etc., etc. And the last thing I want is to have to boost screen brightness in order to compensate for glare. Well, both of these LG Gram Pros, well, they have matte screens. Also, in our testing, they share an almost identical color gamut that matches up perfectly with LG's claims of them covering 99% of the DCI-P3 color space. But the 16-inch does get a little bit brighter and also has slightly better overall contrast. There's also one major difference here. On our samples at least, the 17-inch screen was a lot more color accurate, while the 16-inch had a significantly higher saturation rate, which lowered its overall accuracy. And look, more saturation might make an image look better to the human eye, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's scientifically accurate. So most people will probably gravitate to the overall look of the 16-inch model. But if you're doing any type of work that needs a precise color space, the Pro 17 will give you the best end result. So the other thing I want to mention here is the keyboard. Basically, it's identical on both the 16 and 17-inch models, but I've got some thoughts on it. Personally, I don't use the numpad all that much, but I can understand why LG went with one for their Pro Series devices. Personally, I find that it makes the entire typing experience a little bit, I guess you would call it like claustrophobic, but I want to know your thoughts. Do you prefer having a numpad on your 16 and 17-inch laptops, or would you rather, I guess, they flex out the keyboard space itself to give you a little bit more of a engaging typing experience? Another thing LG did for both laptops is make upgrading relatively easy. Unlike many other thin and lights, you just have to take off the 4 feet and remove the screws underneath them. Both of them have a pair of SSD slots on 1TB models. One space is used while both are populated with individual 1TB drives on the 2TB versions. And yes, memory is soldered into place, but what did you expect from such thin laptops? So there's a couple of other interesting features with these laptops that maybe not a lot of people are talking about, but I personally found interesting. One of them is the LG Gram Link. So what that allows you to do is pair up your Gram notebook with your smartphone and use both interchangeably for some basic functionality. Like for example, I have it loaded up here on my smartphone, and you can actually load up Spotify and use your laptop as a Bluetooth speaker. You can control the volume, you can skip tracks, etc., etc. Some other things that it can do is transfer photos or files from one to another, or mirror or extend your display to it. Actually, Windows sees your device as a second screen, so it can be used just like another monitor would. You can even use the keyboard and mouse input on your smartphone, get mobile notifications on the Gram, and a bunch of other stuff. There's of course some AI features here, with the primary one being the on-device LG Gram chat that can be used without access to the internet. This is actually the cornerstone of what LG calls hybrid AI, which combines local AI processing with the optional cloud-based LG Gram chat features. It's still in the beta phase, take that into account, and it's pretty basic overall, but with it you can query things like settings you might want to change, tips and tricks about the laptop, and it even provides some basic translation. Right now though, it's only to or from Korean, but like a lot of the other features here, this should expand as new updates are rolled out. And as a small side note, I actually noticed LG's optimized this to work on the integrated Arc GPU rather than Intel's dedicated NPU. So basically that's the quick overview of the new LG Gram Pro Series in 16-inch and 17-inch form. And look, I hope that this buying guide allows you to choose one or the other if you are specifically looking at these laptops. Then again, I mean, look, LG also has the 14-inch Gram, which serves a very, very different market. But anyways, I'm Mike with Hardware Canucks. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Have a great day, guys.